putting our current environment in historical context. So here we have another chart, a little bit busy here, but this is showing real prices since 1971. So this is the S&P 500, this blue line. And what economists love to talk about are regression to the mean. So they draw this trend line through it and say, okay, it keeps pulling. It's like this red line is like this anchor. It keeps pulling the prices back down to it, and they never stay there. They go below it, and then it pulls it back up to it. So we can see in 2000, which was the height of the tech bubble. You remember the NASDAQ was super high, and people were making crazy money in the tech stocks. That was actually 155% above the mean at that point. And we really haven't, the most we've regressed is slightly below it in 2009. So there's a lot of concern that we could, enter into a period where we're at a point below the trend line for a while, for a few years, to get us back to this mean reversion they talk about. What this chart is showing us, there's some different points in history here. So we can see the Fed funds rate, that's the rate that the federal government charges, and a lot of interest rates are based on that, prime rates based on it. And then the green, it would be the Treasury yields. So that's how much a bond, a 10-year Treasury bond issued by the U.S. government will pay. And then the blue is the S&P 500. So we can see the all-time high was in 2007, then Bear Stearns, hedge fund collapse, and then the collapse of Bear Stearns itself, and then Lehman Brothers. That Lehman Brothers, that really brought it way down. So then the Federal Reserve intervened, and the quantitative easing started. And we can see when once that took effect, that quantitative easing, it really lifted the stocks. And then it ended. And when it ended, everybody knew it was ending. So, the stock market usually anticipates things. Started going down, down, down. Then we had the Jackson Hole speech by Ben Bernanke, which lifted stocks again because he said they're going to start another quantitative easing program where the government essentially is printing money, going out and buying bonds that banks hold to give banks more money so they can loan it out into the economy. So then that started. Then we can see what happened when that ended. That was last summer. And then they started their Operation Twist, which is another form of getting money out into the market for people to borrow and so forth. So that's kept things, back up again. So basically what this is showing is without Federal Reserve intervention, our economy is not sustaining itself. So I know everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people get upset about this intervention and so forth, but without it, things would be a lot worse. And then what this slide is showing, historically speaking, this is consumer debt as a percentage of our economy. So we can see how it has periods where it's increasing, periods where it's flat, and then increasing again. Now at the end, consumer debt is going down. We're in a deleveraging phase here, where people are paying back their debt. Some people went bankrupt. It's not going to get paid back. But we have this deleveraging period. And typically during times when consumer debt is not increasing, bodes for a weak stock market. So we still have more deleveraging to go. That's going to take some time to get that all worked out through the system. So there's a concern that the stock market's being held up by government, and if they stop, it's going to really go down, just like we saw on that other slide would happen. That's why when Ben Bernanke sneezes the right way, the markets go crazy. And that makes it very hard to plan, to be honest, because fundamental things that are going on in the markets don't seem to mean anything. It's really about, is the government going to be supporting it or not? What happened was if you look at the savings rate went down to a negative number at the height of all this. So people were saving money. Think about our parents or ourselves. They save money. You don't spend it all. Put a down payment on a house. You don't borrow the whole thing. But what happened in 2000? Well, there were a lot of things. There was all of these fancy mortgages and derivatives and things like that. That was one. But there was a real big push politically to have people own their own homes. It was seen as, this is the American way. This is going to really help the economy. More and more people should be owning their own homes. But the unfortunate thing is most of those people, many of them, could not really afford to pay the mortgages on their homes. So that's why you see the debt. Look at the consumer debt. It went up to almost 100%. Crazy. It was unsustainable. And that's the problem, with bubbles. You just think they're going to go on forever, and they're not. Credit became easier. Credit cards, the proliferation of credit cards, home equity loans. I remember back actually in the 80s when they even changed, you used to have a certain You had to have a certain amount of income to be able to get a mortgage, to support your debt and so forth. There were different hurdles you had to cross over, and those started to be relaxed. We had deregulation of banks also that started in the 80s. So they're competing, for this business, and so it's like who could give the better, get more business in. And also what you saw too was a lot of banks used to hold their mortgages, and they stopped doing that. So they had no risk. They would sell them. You get your mortgage, you have a different mortgage company the next payment, right? We've all experienced that probably. There was really various things that loosened these standards. And that actually became part of the problem of a lot of these fancy investment instruments that invested in mortgages. They used to be issued like Merrill Lynch was a partnership. The partners all had skin in the game. When these companies became publicly traded and they didn't have to hold a percentage. It used to be you had to hold a percentage of something that you issued. They didn't have to anymore. So they just made these huge fees on these debt instruments and sold them off. And hopefully we've learned our lesson about all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's unsustainable. And it's still very high as a percentage of our... And the problem here, too, is in the 2000s, people are able to borrow against their homes. They can't do that anymore. So that really has dried up a source of money to be put into the economy, So that's another part of the issue. And corporate profits, so it's interesting. Really what happened back in the 80s and 90s was a shift from corporate profits to household and wage earners. Okay, so corporate profits were lower. You can see here, they were lower percentage. That's because they were paying more money to employees, etc. So employees did better. And now we can see corporate profits really going up, See that down in 2009, 2010, and so forth, up. So it's an average of 10.1%. I mean, it's really gone up. That's helped drive the stock prices. But the big question is that sustainable? Because look at employment. Okay, that's how corporate profits are. That's how they're getting their profits. They're cutting employees. We all know this. I mean, this is no news. So we can see from 1983, we're about where we were in 1983 as far as the percentage of civilian employment that's employed as a percentage of the total population, and wages as a percentage of GDP. So that's what's happening. Wages are not increasing. They're going down. They lay off older workers who are making more money, hire younger workers. We all know about that. That's how the corporate profits are being driven. And the problem is, we're not being paid. We don't have higher wages, and we don't have the percentage of the population working. Who's going to buy the products? That's the problem. And, it seems to me, at least in my deduction here, trying to export. Everybody wants to export all these countries to raise their GDP. But if everybody's exporting, somebody's got to, be buying it. So let's flip to the bright side now. I don't want to leave everybody in a super depressed state, We can see the red dots there are the baby boom. And the height of the baby boom was my birth year, 1957. Started in 1947. So those are the births per year. So we can see it went into the 60s and then dropped significantly. 76 million births in a 19-year period. So that was pretty big. But we can see there was another little baby boomlet, 1989-90. That area got up higher, and it's coming back up again, 2007 and so. So what that means is typically things do well. Like there's a lag of so many years, about 35 years when things do well. So you have births, and then the kids grow up, they go to college, many of them, they get out, they start working, they're making money, they're buying their house, they're having children, they're, buying. And when we did that, in our generation, our parents benefited from that because they got to sell their houses to us because there were a lot of us demanding it, and there wasn't as big of a supply, so they bid up the prices. Same thing with the stock market and so forth. 1990, maybe my children's, if I can ever get my children off the dole, maybe they'll, be paying into the system and I'll benefit from it. So in regards to that, this is very interesting. So the reason for optimism, look at the U.S. projected change in working age population going up between 2012 and 2050. Okay, that's in thousands. So that's 50 million people. Look at China. Everybody thinks China's going to save us, but they had that one child. They're not even replacing themselves, so they're going to have this big gap, and their young people are going to, be supporting their parents and so forth. So You know, it's interesting because with an emerging economy, you know, you'll typically see the birth rates going down when they're become more educated, you know, especially the women are educated about birth control and, you know, family size and so forth, and they start to become more prosperous. But when you have a prosperous economy, like our economy, go back here, look at the births, how they declined in the 70s and 80s. You remember what the 70s and 80s were like? They were tough. They were tough years. So people weren't having children because they couldn't afford to have children. So in a developed economy, the economics definitely affect things, you know, and it affects even, like I know 2007 was a big year, but you see it declining after that. And I was just reading actually where births are declining because of the economy right now. If you think about it, you know, the unemployment rate for kids in their 20s is really high. So they can't, you know, unless they want to live with mom and dad, it's kind of tough. So actually that last slide was supposed to be optimistic. You can go back to that. So this is showing, this is good for our country. This is good. One of the things that can be a little bit charged, but immigration really helps our country, actually, when it comes to the children growing up and getting jobs and consuming and buying homes and so forth. That can really help. Now, if I was in California, I'd probably get thrown out of the room if I said that, because I know they have quite a burden there. All right, so the S&P stock index of 500 largest companies in the U.S., we can see here, this slide shows the wild ride we've had. How many days in one day the index has gone up or down by at least 2%. Started in 2007, started to heat up. 2008, pretty crazy. 2009. 2011 was another crazy year. You know, way more down days than up days. Same thing in 2008. And 2009, there were more down days. Yeah, it makes for a very interesting investing environment. But that won't go on forever. Prior to that, it was pretty calm. We can get past some of the woes in Europe and various things. I think things could calm down.